Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I'm the one who fades into the background when everything works. If the pastor's lapel mic sounds warm and close, if the band sits in a wide pocket that floats without glare, if people cry during the bridge because the synth pad blooms at exactly the right measure. That's me and the rest of our booth living in the margins, turning dials so the story feels inevitable. My name is Evan Hale, lead audio engineer for Summit Commons Church in Arlington, Texas, a campus built into a repurposed arena off I-30 not far from the stadium and the ballpark. Our sanctuary seats 8,000. On a typical Sunday, we fill almost all of them. From the booth, you read a congregation the way a pilot reads a horizon. You notice when the mezzanine doesn't settle, when the far right hangs are a decibel hot, when the children's wing hallway mic picks up a stroller wheel squeak and throws it into the in-ear feeds. That morning, bright, dry air over Tarrant County, the kind of weather that rings like a cymbal. I could tell we were in for a big service. The lobby counters glowed from the new LED retrofit, the cafe line ribboned around stanchions, and the parking team on Collins had their yellow vests flashing like a metronome. I arrived before 6 and did what I always do. Unlock the black Pelican case with our Shure Axient digital transmitters, check the Dante Clockmaster, and walk the floor with a handheld RF scanner while the band tuned up. We run an Avid S6L console at front of house, FiberSnake to the stage box, Dante redundant through a pair of Cisco switches in the amp room. The PA is L-Acoustics K2 mains with Cara front fills, and KS28 subs in cardioid. If that sounds like bragging, it's because I love the system like it can hear me. It makes the sanctuary feel smaller and safer, even when every seat is full. By 8:45, the production channel was already stacked. Lighting to FOH, confirm haze off for the first 2 songs. Broadcast asking for a touch more lav on Pastor Tim's pre-service welcome. Safety wants a reminder that doors auto-lock after 10 minutes. We do lock the doors during services. It's part of a policy update after a different kind of emergency years ago, a way to reduce interruption and create clear channels for our safety team. The latch can be overridden by the control room or by staff badges. It always felt like a one-way metaphor. People flow in, and then everyone's attention flows forward. From the booth sightline, the stage looks like a city. Drums under a polished acrylic shield. A keyboard world wired to a small forest of DI boxes. Black fiber running in disciplined arcs, taped with white cloth labels written in a code that makes sense if you've wound cable for most of your adult life. On the left wing, the sign language interpreter's light. 2 confidence monitors with lyrics and clock. And tucked just off proscenium left, a neat stack of cases labeled EMS for our volunteer medical team. This is a big church in a big city. We planned for sprained ankles, fainting spells, and the occasional hard thing that never becomes a story. When the countdown hit 0, the first song rose like the lift of a curtain. 1,000 lights. The band's hands moving with muscle memory. The congregation standing like brush in wind. I rode the vocal bus and kept the subs tight so the mezz wouldn't get muddy. In the second row of section 104, a boy on a booster seat waved both arms and sang with his whole face. Behind him, an usher named Bernard, retired airfield mechanic, quiet as a battery charger, pointed a latecomer toward an empty seat and smiled with his eyes. At 9:09, the first odd thing happened. On intercom, house to FOH, we're getting radio chatter about a cluster of upset stomachs in the cafe. Might be a bad batch of breakfast burritos. I tapped the talkback and said, "Copy, We'll page if needed. In the video suite, Mary, broadcast director with a laugh you can hear 2 rooms away, rolled her eyes and joked, "And we thought decaf would be the louder complaint." By 9:12, firmware alarms blinked across my Axient control screen. Nothing dramatic, just a few mics momentarily dipping in RF quality and then recovering. Someone's cell phone, I thought. Someone sat on a hotspot. I marked it in the log with a casual watch, then nudged the pastor's lav up a half dB on the broadcast feed so his voice wouldn't lose the room when he walked. At 9:21, Pastor Tim took the stage for the sermon, a talk on the story of the Good Samaritan. Tim has a way of building an image in your mind, the way a road sounds under a cartwheel, the crunch of gravel under sandals. I watched the VU meters in the crowd as he talked about seeing someone at the side of the road and choosing to stop. He said, "Compassion is a decision before it is a feeling," and somewhere in the rafters a small relay clicked. I only know that sound because I once spent an entire Saturday tracking down a hum to a patch panel that needed reseating. At 9:29, everything narrowed to a sharp point. Bernard, the usher with the careful hands, walked across the stage from the wing to signal a family to the front row. He reached the far edge of the platform, paused as if to adjust his tie, and collapsed as though someone had unplugged him. If you have ever run sound when a microphone hits the floor, you know there are 2 beats. Your eyes go to the stage, your hand goes to the mute. I killed the pastor's lav and the stage ambient mics in a single sweep while Mary called, "Camera 3 tight on Tim, don't frame the stage left." The band froze. The crowd made that sound a crowd makes when they forget themselves, a collective inhale that scrapes up the walls. Our medical team moved like they had rehearsed it, which they had. 2 of them, Raina, an ER nurse, and Kofi, a paramedic, were on Bernard within seconds. I switched the room mics to a low mellow music bed from the playback computer, the kind of thing you never want to hear in real life because it means a plan is keeping fear from blooming. Tim stepped to the side and began a soft prayer that felt less like performance and more like memory. Raina worked a bag valve mask. Kofi checked for a pulse. In the booth, I could see the timer on the confidence monitor, the way time behaves like an animal when it's being watched. Then Bernard breathed in, opened his eyes, and stood up with a kind of slow, deliberate stiffness that made every hair on my arms lift. He looked not at Raina's face, not at Tim or the people in front, but toward the nearest source of constant sound, the side-fill speaker stack. He oriented his body toward it the way iron finds a magnet. For a long second, the sanctuary was a held note. Bernard's head tilted, like he was listening for a frequency the rest of us could not hear. Raina said something I couldn't make out. Bernard took a step, then another, and then he kept walking past her, steady and calm, as if none of us were there at all. He did not reach or shout or register any of us. He wanted the sound. There are a lot of stories I've heard about panic. Most are about the moment someone decides the room is not safe. In ours, that moment was quiet and collective. A whisper moved through the first few rows. "Is he okay?" Then became a tug as people stood, unsure whether to help or to flee. Somewhere in the balcony, a parent called a child's name in a voice that had no air in it. Security on intercom. "FOH, this is safety. We've got a situation." Medical, confirm patient status. Raina clipped and steady. Patient regained consciousness with altered responsiveness. Not engaging verbally. Ambulating, behavior unusual. Then a side door banged open, latecomers trying to come in, and magnetized the attention of 100 heads. Our access system locked that door 10 minutes after the service started, the latches on a timed schedule. Whoever rattled it found it closed and hit it harder. The sound boomed against the back wall. The crowd twitched. Our security chief, a retired Arlington officer named Teresa, came over the radio in a voice that could cut through a riot without shouting. "All teams, listen up. Doors are secured. We will open them when we control movement. Pastors, begin calm evacuation messaging from stage. Production, give me house lights to full and mute band. Evan, you are our voice. Put your calmest tone on the room, no technical terms. No rushing. Guide people to sit. We will move by sections." I switched the house lights to full, killed the reverb return so the words wouldn't bloom, and picked up the paging mic. The hiss in the system felt like a surf in the bones. "Friends," I said, and made my voice low and warm like I was telling a bedtime story. "We have a medical situation on stage. Please stay where you are for a moment while our team helps. We will guide you out by sections. You're safe. We're here." 1,000 shoulders dropped a half-inch. Not enough to stop the tremor, but enough to make a line of dominoes stand up again. The band, bless them, remained statues. Pastor Tim began to talk slowly about breathing together. On the production channel, I heard one of our Spanish translation volunteers in the side hall relay my words to her small group in crisp, careful phrases. In the kids' wing, someone turned on the bubble machine to settle 30 toddlers who understood only that the adults had gone still. Bernard kept walking, steady and odd, down off the stage and along the left aisle, eyes on the side fill. He did not seem to remember the shortest route. He drifted a little, as if the lines that tell you where to put your feet had been rubbed out. As he moved, I noticed something else. 3 or 4 people elsewhere in the room, rising slowly, not with panic, but with that same odd gravitation towards sound. A young woman in the mezzanine stood and faced the nearest ceiling speaker. A man in a ranger's cap in section 109 stood with his head cocked as if he could locate a hidden mosquito. Their faces were calm like sleepwalkers. Their families reached for their sleeves and said their names. "Evan," Teresa said in my ear, "I need you to change the room." It was the strangest instruction I've ever gotten, and I understood what she meant without asking. Sound organizes a space. Even in a megachurch, your nervous system maps by listening. If something was drawing people toward speakers, we needed to stop feeding that map. "Copy," I said. I pulled the master matrix down a few decibels, then changed the EQ curve of the mains to flatten the high sheen and lower the sense of directionality. I routed a soft, broad-spectrum wash of air, pink noise, but at the gentlest possible level, into the system to blur the location of the PA, then called the lighting desk. "Gavin, give me house to full white, wash the stage, kill moving lights. Make the space feel like a gymnasium, not a concert." "On it," he said, hands already flying. In the broadcast suite, Mary made the hard call to cut the live stream and throw a still slate with a simple message. "We're pausing our broadcast. Please pray with us." Behind her, her team continued to capture footage for documentation, a practice that had nothing to do with putting anything online and everything to do with remembering what happened in order to learn. "Security to facilities," Teresa said. "I need a manual override on doors by quadrant. We'll start with north exits, hold the south. Kids' wing remains secure until we manage adult movement. Ushers, stay at your posts and wait for instructions. Do not attempt to move anyone who resists. Speak softly." The room breathed. The choir volunteer in front of me, a high school science teacher named Arjun who knew the frequency of helium for fun, leaned over the back rail and said, without taking his eyes off the stage, "The side fills, they're like magnets." I nodded, hands working the board as if it could read me like a heart monitor. "Friends," I said into the paging mic, "we're going to guide the room out one section at a time. If you are in sections 101 and 102, please stand when your usher raises a card and move toward the north exits. Families with strollers, you will follow." Everyone else, please remain seated and breathe slowly. You are safe. Quiet is work. It doesn't happen without someone making it happen. The first 2 sections began to move in a murmur no louder than a library. The doors opened and a slice of Texas sunshine cut the back wall like a promise. And then, in the middle of all that careful focus, a man near the back tried to run. It took me a second to understand what my eyes were telling me. He wasn't sprinting for an exit. He was sprinting toward a wall speaker, arms half raised like a person reaching for a song he loved. The people in his row grabbed at his jacket and missed. He collided with the cinder block with a dull thud, staggered, and then stood breathing hard with his ear to the grill, as if listening for a secret. "Do not chase," Teresa said instantly. "Let him stop. He's not targeting people." It was the first time anyone spoke the shape of what we were seeing. The behavior was not aggressive so much as oriented, like moths to a porch lamp, like iron filings to a magnet. On a different mic, in a channel I normally reserve for roading talkback to musicians, Mary whispered, "Evan, downstairs. The translation headsets. People are putting them on and getting that faraway look." I pictured the bins of RF receivers the Spanish and ASL teams hand out every service. The receivers deliver a clean feed from a booth lined with acoustic panels, a warm voice layered over the pastor's cadence. Now, those receivers were tiny, portable lighthouses. "Kill the ox to translation," I said. It felt like pushing a raft away. Down on stage, Pastor Tim made a graceful pivot I later learned he did without thinking. He stepped forward and told a story about being in an airport when a power outage hit. He described how people looked to the employee in the vest. He reminded the room that our ushers and safety team wore those vests. "Watch for the people in yellow," he said, his voice steady and normal, and 8,000 pairs of eyes pivoted like a flock. We moved the room with that flocking instinct. Sections peeled off in pairs, then 4s, like petals. Every time someone with that oriented gaze stood and drifted toward a speaker, an usher stepped into their line of sight and quietly asked them to listen to a different thing. "Do you hear me? Look here, walk with me." It worked more often than it didn't. The ones who didn't respond either stood still facing a grill or moved slowly along the wall, unhurried, as if on a different schedule altogether. Then our assumptions changed again. In the kids' wing, the bubble machine did its job for a while. So did the coloring sheets and the patience of saints. But a 10-year-old boy in an autism support classroom, bright, precise, fluent in constellation names, stopped coloring and stood with that same tilted head. He walked to the corner where the air handler hummed behind a vent, placed his palm on the metal, and smiled like he had remembered a dream. His volunteer texted the coordinator called safety called me. "Evan," Teresa said, "this isn't just speakers, it's any steady sound. HVAC, refrigerators, dishwashers, generators. You can't turn silence on like a switch in a building this size. You can turn off the music and the sermon and the chatter, but the building will still have a heartbeat. The HVAC system is tied to a building management panel that talks in acronyms and winter schedules. The refrigerators hum so milk doesn't spoil. The server room fans spin like tiny turbines. Facilities," Teresa said, "begin stage shutdown of non-critical mechanicals, maintain ventilation in kids' wing and medical only. We will clear people as we can." In the booth, I layered in a barely audible field recording I keep for when the room feels too clinical. The white hush of a forest after snow, dead simple, broad enough not to tug at anyone's compass. It wasn't silence, but it washed the edges off the room's map. I kept my voice on the mic like a handrail. "Friends in sections 103 and 104, ushers are ready for you. Parents, keep your children with you. We'll reunite families from the kids' wing when the lobby is steady. Remember to breathe slowly." On the production channel, a volunteer on the top row said, "I think my husband is like the usher was. He's listening." Another voice answered, "We see you. A team member is near you." Teresa's voice threaded through it all like a spine. Bernard, meanwhile, had reached the stage's left wall and was standing with his palms lightly touching the painted cinder block where the side fill's back hum bled through. He looked like a person listening at a seashell. Raina stood a yard away, hands open, calm as a lake. She said his name. He didn't blink. Pastor Tim, with exquisite restraint, didn't say the word outbreak. He didn't say the word infection. He said, "We're seeing something unusual, and we're taking care of our people." We learned in minutes what would have taken us days if the room had been smaller. Some people seemed unchanged. Some looked a little dazed from the fear and the abrupt shift in the service. A smaller group, maybe 30, maybe 50, exhibited the same orientation to steady sound, moving with slow intent toward speakers, vents, anything that whispered a constant note. They weren't violent. They weren't even impatient. They were tuned to a signal the rest of us couldn't hear. We also learned that trying to pull them away made things worse. A well-meaning deacon tried to guide his sister away from a lobby speaker by tugging at her elbow. She stiffened, not in anger, but in the mechanical way a sleepwalker resists being woken suddenly, and he let go, startled. When he stood in front of her and spoke in a calm voice, she tracked him slowly and walked with him as long as his voice remained steady. When he stopped speaking, she turned back to the speaker like a sunflower turning to the sun. "Use your voice as a guide rope," Teresa said. "No touching unless there's immediate danger. Keep your tone even. Don't bargain, don't scold." The doors opened and closed like breathing. Outside, the parking team improvised a quiet corridor between the building and the lot, guiding people toward open space away from the HVAC roof stacks and the low rumble of backup gensets. The police officers at the curb, off-duty but fully present, kept their radios low. The cafe crew shut off every machine they could, unplugged the beverage coolers, and slid them into a storeroom, their hands moving like dancers. In the nursery, a volunteer used a battery-powered white noise machine to shepherd 3 oriented parents gently down a hallway by slowly walking backward and letting them follow the soft wash of sound out of reach of the louder hums. 10 o'clock arrived like a line in a song. The second service was supposed to start then. In the kids' wing, the bubble machine sputtered out of solution, and someone refilled it without looking. In the green room, the band held their guitars like they were holding their breath. I brought my hands off the console and felt the booth as a physical thing, the curved rail under my palms, the soft scuff of my sneaker on the carpet, the way the air tasted like dust and hope. That's when the stadium lights flickered and steadied again. All our mechanicals had been leaning on a smaller share of power, and we felt the building's bones in the way the air changed temperature for half a breath. In the lower lobby, a man in a denim jacket with a shaved head, one of those faces you clock because it's vigilant rather than jumpy, stopped moving and lifted his chin. He was our only law enforcement volunteer on shift who wasn't already deployed. A constable named Deacon, a name that made him smile every time. He keyed his chest mic without looking at it. "I've got 3 oriented individuals near the north vestibule turning towards the generator room door," he said. "The door is locked, and they're calm. I'm going to hold them here with a quiet voice until someone can relieve me." "Copy," Teresa said. "Evan, can you send a soft voice feed to that vestibule?" I looked at my patch bay and felt like a conductor being asked to move a river 1 bend to the left. We had a small ceiling speaker in that vestibule tied to the paging bus. I routed my mic there and lowered my head, speaking like I was teaching a child to float. Hi there. You're safe. If you can hear me, look toward the sound of my voice. Good. That's it. Let's stand right here together. We're safe. On the booth's small monitor, I watched 3 heads turn toward the small ceiling speaker, then towards Deacon's face, then back. They were pendulums. We were gravity, or something like it. People in the first services who had made it into the lot clustered in the shade of the trees with paper cups of water, and the dazed expressions of people who paid attention at the right moment and didn't quite know how. Volunteers walked through them with the soft confidence of flight attendants in clear air. Nearby, a woman stood with her hands on her husband's shoulders, speaking to him softly while he looked at the horizon like the whole world was a dial he was trying to tune. The sun burned bright on the cars. The stadium roofs glinted like a line of polished shields. You could hear birds. Back inside, a different problem found us. A handful of people who had been sitting calmly while we moved sections began to stand, one by one, and walk toward the stage. Not toward the speakers this time, but toward the drum shield. The drummer had left his snare's throw-off engaged, and the lightest vibration made a faint, steady rattle that we wouldn't have noticed on any other day. The 4 who walked toward it were as serene as saints and as sure as sleepwalkers. When they reached the shield, they put their palms flat on the acrylic. The faint rattle slowed like a clock winding down. They smiled small smiles that were almost childish. I reached over and flipped the throw-off in my mind, but the drummer had already done it 3 minutes ago, not understanding why the sound felt like an itch. Everything's a lighthouse to them, Mary said softly on my talkback. Anything that hums or rattles or sings. Then we dimmed the lighthouses, I said. Facilities killed the big air handlers one by one, leaving only the smaller units that kept the kids' wings safe. The cafe power strips went dark like a string of lanterns. In the server room, we dragged in the portable acoustic panels we use for choir booths and leaned them against the racks. A feeble gesture that nonetheless softened the fan spin by a hair. I dropped the entire house system another 2 decibels and spread a tiny field of soft sound that made the room feel less like an arrow and more like a lake. People kept moving outward, less like a crowd and more like a tide. Where they ran into oriented individuals, they walked like the ocean around rocks. Use your voice as a rope, Teresa repeated, like a sacrament. At 10:25, the control room phone lit up on the hard line. I hate that phone. We almost never use it except when cell networks tangle or someone wants a line that never drops. I picked it up. The voice on the other end was the county. Calm, measured, using the default script you hear when a situation is unfolding faster than the words to describe it. There had been reports, scattered, unconfirmed, of people collapsing and rising in large gatherings across the metro, shopping centers, a boys' soccer tournament in Grand Prairie, a university lecture hall. The most consistent note was not aggression, but orientation to uncontrolled sound sources, a phrase that kept using itself. Spreading infection. No one said what kind. Emergency operations were spooling up. The county asked for eyes and asked us not to add to the noise. Copy, I said, my mouth dry. We'll move people as quietly as we can. I hung up and looked at our small world. The console glowing like a ship's wheel. The room still half full and trembling. The people on stage who had been brave enough to keep looking outward. The people near the walls who had turned inward to an invisible signal. I glanced at the medical kit stack and caught Raina's eye. She looked as steady as I have ever seen a human being look. Gavin, I said to lighting, leave the room steady, no cues. Mary, keep recording. Teresa, we're with you. I picked up the paging mic again. Friends, I said, We've been practicing compassion all morning. It's just a different shape than the one we expected. We're going to continue to guide you out section by section. If you are feeling drawn toward a sound, any sound, look at the person in the yellow vest nearest you and listen to their voice instead. If you're with someone who is having trouble, speak softly and steadily to them. Don't pull. We'll walk together. We moved the south sections next, easing a line of families with strollers toward the long corridor that ran along the outer wall. Someone had taped paper arrows at knee height rather than eye level, so little ones could follow them. A grandmother in a floral dress held her grandson's hand and told him, in a voice that didn't waver, about the time he was born during a thunderstorm and how the sky sounded like big drums, and the boy listened to her like she was telling him the only true thing. Outside, the parking lot had become a landscape. A team set up a quiet reunification area under the covered drop-off, away from the air handler intakes. People flowed into the shade, then onward to a field where the sound of the city thinned. Volunteers passed paper cups of water and spoke in tones so even and low they could have been reading the phone book. I saw a man guiding his wife by holding his own hand in front of him like a lantern and speaking to her from his chest. She followed his voice like a compass. If it sounds like we were unfailingly calm, I am telling it poorly. My hands shook. There was a moment when I had to step back from the console and put both palms flat on the booth rail and press down like I could press the panic out of my body and into the carpet. Mary, who never touches the audio, reached over and put a fingertip on the mute group that controlled the subwoofers as if to say, "I can anchor this if you need to breathe." I nodded and did. I took one breath that went all the way to my shoes, and then two more, and then the world came back into focus like a camera lens clicking. The last third of the room was the hardest. We had the highest density of oriented individuals near the stage left wall, drawn initially by the side fills and then by the drum shield, then by the hum behind the plaster. We decided to move around them rather than through them. Ushers formed a soft corridor with their bodies and their words, and people walked in a file that felt monastic. When one oriented man turned and began to drift toward the corridor, the usher at the end of the line, Bernard's friend, a widow named Louise who knows everyone's birthday, stepped forward and said, in a voice that could have soothed lightning, "Walk with me, dear. I'm right here." He looked at her and matched her pace. The last obstacle was the kids' wing. We had kept most of the children in their rooms until the lobbies emptied and we could move them without exposing them to the press of adult nerves. The hallway outside the kids' check-in desk held a soft hammering from a beverage cooler that someone had unplugged, but whose compressor was winding down like a stubborn spinning top. Every time a passing adult's voice stopped, two oriented parents, calm, hands at their sides, turned toward the cooler like sunflowers. We boxed the cooler in with rolling whiteboards, then discovered that only made it more alluring. The adults touched the boards and smiled. So we pulled the whiteboards away and replaced the pull with a different anchoring. Two of our child care workers with voices like lullabies stood 6 feet apart and read children's books slowly, their voices overlapping like two gentle rivers. The oriented parents followed those voices instead of the dying hum and drifted down the hall as if sleepwalking between streams. We reunited the last family in a side courtyard where the air moved like the tide, and the sound of the street was broken by trees. Parents cried like people in a safe room after a storm. Children rubbed their eyes and stared up at the big people with the vast, curious calm of small animals. The ones who had oriented still stood near the faint sounds we could not control. The drone of a distant jet, the hum of a transformer on a Yes, This Is the City Sunday morning. They were peaceful, like listeners who would not put the headphones down even if the room burned. In the distance, sirens threaded the air. Not frenzy, pattern. A metronome for a city that had remembered it owned a rhythm. The county sent a health team to the lot. They arrived with clipboards and soft shoes and questions organized like nets. We gave them what we had: numbers, observations, a vocabulary we'd tested against 8,000 heartbeats. They gave us what they had: a careful description of a pattern they were also seeing elsewhere, a request to continue moving people into open spaces away from mechanical hums, a reminder to keep voices low and regular, and a promise to share what they learned as they learned it. By noon, the sanctuary was almost empty. A few oriented individuals remained, hands lightly touching the cinder block by the side fill position, faces composed, breathing slow as sleep. We placed chairs near them so a volunteer could sit and speak gently as needed, not to drag them away but to keep a human voice nearer than the wall's quiet sigh. We posted signs by the doors reminding anyone who re-entered to silence their phones, a first in the history of church signage that might actually be obeyed. In the booth, I powered down the S6L and watched the console's screen go from a universe of numbers to black. The silence after a shutdown is not true silence. It is the feeling of a room exhaling. I walked down the stairs to the floor. The stage smelled like wood and dust and hand sanitizer. Bernard still stood with his palm against the wall, very gently, like a person greeting an old friend through a screen. Raina stood nearby, soft-talking. "We're here, Bernard. We're with you." "Do you think he can hear you?" I asked her. She shrugged in a way that looked like faith. "Sometimes hearing is not about ears," she said. "Sometimes it's about distance." We stood together for a while and listened to the quiet hum that is the underside of any large building. It sounded like a held note in a hymn, the kind people lean into without thinking. I thought about the sermon we didn't get to hear and the road we had been asked to walk instead. Compassion as a decision before it is a feeling. How sometimes the decision looks like turning down a fader. In the afternoon, the county used our field as a staging area for families who needed a place to stand in the shade. Our cafe team set out water. No machines, just coolers and cups and a lot of old-fashioned pouring. Yes, and the translation volunteers did their work without headsets, sitting knee to knee with people who needed words in a different order to make sense. The sign language interpreter rested, and then stood in the grass to talk with a family whose daughter had been at the front of the room. Her hands shone in the light like the wings of a bird that had found its draft again. News trickled in through officials rather than phones, which felt like a grace. The pattern was wide. The advice was consistent. Reduce steady mechanical noise, favor open air, keep voices steady and warm, move slowly. There were hospitals and clinics, yes, but they were not overflowing with injuries. They were filled with a new kind of waiting. The phrase spreading infection became less important than the question of what to do next, and the answer was not an easy one, like a checklist, but a hard one, like patience. Sometime near sunset, I walked back into the sanctuary alone with a flashlight and my badge. The room felt like the inside of a shell. The paper programs lay scattered like leaves. A child's drawing sat on a seat. 3 stick figures holding hands under a big square building with a cross on top and a tree that looked like a green cloud. I turned on the work lights to a level no brighter than twilight and stood at the center aisle and listened. The air handlers were asleep. The servers behind their panels thrummed softly like a cat a room away. Somewhere outside, a train whispered. At the stage left wall, I found a little row of marks where palms had pressed dust into paint. I placed my own palm there and felt the vibration low in my bones, the way a far river feels when you stand on a bridge and close your eyes. It was not sinister. It was simply there. I thought of all the people who'd been drawn to that hum as if it were a harbor after drifting. I wondered if this was how their bodies had made sense of a signal their minds didn't want. My radio crackled. Teresa. Her voice was softer than the one she uses when a room needs to be a single organism. "You all right, Evan?" "Yeah," I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. "You?" "Tired," she said. "Grateful. Proud of our people. We learned more in 3 hours than I usually want to learn in a year." "Do you think they'll come back?" I asked, and knew I wasn't asking about oriented individuals or even about Sunday service. "People always come back to places they were cared for," she said. "Sometimes not right away, but they remember the voice that told them they were safe." I clicked my radio off and let her words live in the room. I remembered the boy in the booster seat, the way he sang with his whole face and the way his mother had looked at him when the doors opened and sunlight made a suitcase out of fear. I remembered the usher with the careful hands, pressing his palm to a wall. I remembered Pastor Tim saying compassion is a choice before it feels like one. I remembered that my hands knew how to change a room's map in ways I had never expected to need. When I stepped outside, the sky over Arlington had shifted to that electric blue hour that makes every surface look gently lit from within. The parking lot was a different kind of congregation, knots of people standing at distances that made their voices carry without bristling. A circle of teenagers passed a soccer ball quietly, tapping it under their shoes so it would not skitter and ring against curbs. A woman read psalm lines in Spanish to her father without looking down, and his face turned toward her voice like a planet to a star. A little girl tied a bright ribbon around a bollard and then untied it and tied it again, inventing a game with rules only she understood. In the distance, a chorus of cicadas started up, the old Texas metronome more steady and gentle than any machine. We did not solve anything that day. We learned how to survive the first hour of a thing that did not fit our words. We learned to turn down the wrong songs and turn up the right ones. We learned that a building has a body and that bodies listen even when they pretend not to. We learned that emergency can be a way to say, pay closer attention. Later, after the county's first written advisories, and the quiet press conference and a dozen debriefs, after we walked the sanctuary with clipboards counting every possible source of hum, after we rolled heavy acoustic panels into corners that had seemed harmless yesterday, after we trained ushers to use their voices like steady ropes, and after we created a new kind of volunteer team whose job was simply to stand near and speak calmly, I went back to the booth and powered the S6L on again. The console woke like an animal that trusts you. The tiny fans in the back whispered. The screen came alive with meters and names and little colored boxes that meant human beings who had learned something together. I loaded a scene I labeled not by date but by word. Quiet. The faders rose to a place where the room would not pull on anyone's compass. The routing drew a map that favored hallways that emptied to courtyards and courtyards that emptied to grass. The paging mic sat where my hand could reach it without looking. I spoke into it, out of habit, and my voice went to a silent room as gently as a hand on a shoulder. "We're here," I said, and heard it in my own head like a promise. "We're here." The next Sunday, we would have a different kind of service. Fewer instruments, more voices. Doors rigged to open in gentle pulses towards the sky, shorter messages spoken as if to a friend in a quiet kitchen. The kids' wing would set out stacks of picture books about rivers, and about seashells and about robots who wake up and learn what softness is. The cafe would hand out pastries wrapped in paper that didn't crinkle. The bands would play with brushes and pads instead of sticks and amps. We would treat every steady hum like a bell tower and every human voice like a way home. And I, a sound technician, would work in the background and in the foreground at once, hands on the room's heartbeat. I would watch the meters and the faces and the way air moved. If people were drawn toward the wrong kind of music, I would give them a better song. If the hum of the world grew too loud, I would teach us all to breathe. Emergency ended, not by alarm but by attention. We did not lock the doors and forget the rest of the city. We opened them when the room could carry it. We took the long way down the aisle and found the sanctuary was not the building, but the way we listened to one another. I will tell you this as plainly as a level check. When an usher collapses and rises again and thousands panic, the console is a raft and a flashlight and a prayer. The work is to choose the next quiet thing and then the next. The work is to learn the room like it is alive. The work is to be a voice that says, "You're safe," and to mean it with your whole chest. If there's a road, it's always easier to walk with a hand on your shoulder and a story in your ear. On that Sunday, our story was not the one we printed in the bulletin. It was the one we learned together. Reduce the hum, raise the human, move like water around stone, and refuse to let fear be the loudest sound. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.